So, good evening to everyone, and a very warm welcome to our first webinar after our first webcast series for our Beyond Confines program for the Mind and Life Europe Friends. We're delighted that you're joining us. We've scheduled 90 minutes for this interactive discussion with our presenter for this first series, Michel Bitbol. And this is really a time for you to engage with Michel Bitbol and to ask all the questions you've been wanting to ask him for a long time. And as a result of watching the 7 series that he's put together, which we hope will be the first of 3. So we're very excited about this. And Uta reminded me that it's always good to begin with one of our value cards, which I sometimes forget, but I have it here. And I thought that I would just put up the obvious one, which is to stimulate dialogue and really to invite you to engage with Michel. It's really a wonderful and special opportunity that we have this evening. The first series that we were offered in the Philosophy webcast is entitled Quantum Mechanics, a Theory with No View of the World. And I hope that you've had a chance to view all of the 7 presentations, or at least some of them, to engage with Michel. And I don't want to make a long introduction because, again, it's really your time and your time to engage with Michel Bitbol. I also decided not to give what would otherwise be an extensive introduction because his credentials are very impressive, to say the least. But I take it you've gotten to know him by watching these short presentations. However, I have asked Michel to give a short summary, if it's at all possible, of between 5 and 10 minutes, basically to kind of bring us back into the moment and to set the context. And after that, we're going to turn it over to you to ask questions. And the way we thought to do this is to make it quite informal, and that you could just raise your hand and ask your question. I will call on you, I'll moderate. And if it's a very complicated question, or if you would prefer not to speak it, you're welcome to write it in the chat, and then I'll relay it to Michel, so he doesn't have to, read all the different things in the chat function. Again, other comments also, or unclarities, or things maybe that you might want to have repeated, feel free to use the chat function. We'll be watching it carefully. And so, as I said, 5 to 10 minutes, a summary, and then we're going to turn it over into the interactive webinar that we've promised you. So again, a warm welcome, and we look forward, Michel, to what you share with us, a summary. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Cornelius. It's a pleasure to inaugurate this series of webinars. So why did I choose the issue of quantum physics, which is very technical, very elaborate, and so on, to start this series? It sounds a little bit strange, isn't it? But I think it's not completely by chance that I choose this topic. It's because usually many people make a parallel between certain ideas of Buddhism and certain discoveries of quantum physics. And when they make this parallel, it's often seen as a strong analogy. And this strong analogy is meant to bear on the views of the world that is associated on the one hand with Buddhism, and on the other hand with quantum physics. And behind this apparent analogical convergence of 2 views of the world, many people think that there is something deep to understand about the nature of reality, and also something deep to hope for, namely hope for extraordinary effects in nature that would, I would say, support non-usual, strange features, for instance, of what occurs in meditation, of what occurs between two people when they are strongly connected together, and so on and so on. So there is hope for magic from quantum physics. But when you study a little bit more the two disciplines, namely quantum physics and Buddhism, or Buddhism and quantum physics, whatever, you soon understand that these two disciplines have not really something absolutely new to say about what the world is in its nature, independently of us. What these two disciplines have really to say, what these two disciplines are, namely what is their main originality, their main novelty, is rather the contrary, namely a criticism of the very idea that you can give a view of the world. For instance, when you dig into the Madhyamaka school of Buddhism, what you see is that the very concept that is central to this school of Buddhism, namely emptiness, is not something that says new elements of knowledge about the world. It's rather the contrary. It says you cannot say certain things about the world. You cannot say, for instance, that it has an own nature. It doesn't have an intrinsic set of properties. The same for quantum physics. The pictures of the world that are, supposed to be given, provided by quantum physics, are just tentative bits and pieces of something that help people to think, but they don't really give you a picture of the world as it is independently of us. Rather the contrary. The best way you can understand quantum physics is to grasp, well, to appreciate the fact that there are no possibilities of giving descriptions of the world without any connection to us who are the explorers. What is to be explored is not completely detached from the explorer. So it's a negative teaching. It's not a positive teaching, but a negative teaching that opens up a whole world of reflection. It opens up the possibility of making something really new with these two disciplines. So it's not something about the world, but it's something about the openness you should have when you deal with the world. And what is really fascinating is that when you go deep into, for instance, quantum mechanics, with this way of being and way of thinking that is so close to the spirit of Buddhism, then you suddenly do a lot of progress. You solve, or rather dissolve, many of the so-called mysteries of quantum mechanics. You solve or dissolve the so-called paradoxes. And you know that in my series of talk, I gave you some examples of that. For instance, say, the famous duality of waves and corpuscles. What is that? How is it possible that you unite in a single element two ways of being that are so different? One way of being that means that something is extremely localized and permanent, which is the way of being of particles. And another way of being that means that, in fact, these elements are spread everywhere in space. It's the mode of being of waves. How is it possible that you can combine two modes of being that are so different, so opposite? Well, simple, because these are not modes of being. They are just appearances that are relative to the type of experimental apparatus we use in order to study these things. So when you have understood that, it's very simple, very clear, very non, it doesn't need any knowledge of mathematics, but it needs a complete shift of mind. When you have accepted to do this shift of mind, then everything becomes clear. And you know that in the series of lecture, I give other examples. So here are some ideas I wished to convey to you very shortly. And I hope we'll have many occasions to discuss that.
Great, thank you, Michel. That was I was wondering how you were going to manage to do that so adroitly and skillfully, because there's a lot of content in those 7 sessions there. So thanks again. So again, the floor is really open, and we have enough time that we can have a fairly wide-ranging discussion. So I would invite you to ask questions of understanding, or maybe questions to the one or the other concept that Michel described in his presentations. As you choose. So please raise your hand and wave it a little bit so I can see you. And because I have I think 2 pages here. If I'm not calling on you, just take off your mute and say something. Who wants to be the icebreaker?
So I think Wolfgang raised his hand virtually. That's the little white on blue symbol.
Right. Okay, Wolfgang, I see you there, upper left. Go ahead. Thanks, Nina.
There we go. Okay, thank you very much. Well, my first question is not a kind of physics itself question, but a question about your process, Michel, of your discovery and learning. So while you were studying quantum physics, you made several discoveries along the way, maybe learned about new concepts that changed your way of thinking. And some of them might have been challenging. So I'm curious whether there's something you can tell about from your memory, from your experiences, about when you achieved a certain kind of breakthrough or shift in your thinking. For instance, maybe when you first heard about cubism, quantum Bayesianism, that might have changed your views, and maybe it was easy to accommodate, or it has challenged you and you needed some time to allow to integrate it, because it would shift from what you were holding on to before. And so yeah, I would like to ask you whether you can share something about these experiences and experiential process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Wolfgang. Yeah, well, maybe it's a good story to tell, because you are right, Wolfgang. Because in fact, when I started my studies in physics in general, I was caught by the spell of disclosing the nature of the world, the inner intrinsic nature of the world. So as everyone, as most physicists do. And I found that the theory of relativity was much more appealing for that, because it gives you a clear picture of the world with a beautiful mathematics that can be described in terms of geometry. And geometry is very visual, you can see that. It's wonderful to see, one of these diagrams in which you have 4 dimensions of space-time. But everyone at the time, at that time, namely long ago, in the 70s, 80s, was thinking that quantum physics is an ugly theory that doesn't fit very well with the desire to understand the nature of the world and the nature of reality. And therefore, there was a little bit of contempt for that, for quantum physics. People were thinking, okay, this is just a provisional theory that will change very soon and will really give us the true answers after it has been completely modified and rediscovered. But so I wanted to understand what was behind this theory. And the more I progressed, the more I understood that precisely, in fact, the problem of quantum physics was not so difficult after all. It was just about a complete shift of mind. It was not something about a difficulty in understanding it, because the mathematics are very simple. The way of using it is absolutely elementary. All physicists, after 1 or 2 years of study, can do that. So it's very easy. What is difficult is to change the prejudice that prevent us from tasting the beauty of it. So when I understood that, it was in the mid-90s, my whole view of life and the world changed. And it was precisely at that time that I discovered Buddhism. When I understood that Buddhism was not a view of the world, but it was a way of being that was, you know, very favorable to the understanding of this shift of mind that was necessary to enter into quantum physics, I had the feeling of a harmony. You know? And that's the way I really entered into quantum physics. Strangely, Buddhism helped, not by offering a sort of analogy, but just by offering the possibility to open our mind to something really different, to a world of thinking that is really non-conventional. So here is, I think, a little bit of my story with quantum physics. And by the way, cubism is much, is very, you know, it's not very old. It was formulated only, maybe very seriously, only 10 years ago. So for me, it was a late discovery, but it didn't change anything just because I had already done this path. And Cubism was just a wonderful confirmation, nothing more. Thank you, Wolfgang.
Thomas, please.
Hello. Can you hear me? Thank you for your talks. Were really interesting. I'm not sure you talked about it. I can't remember, but in quantum physics, I know we use like probabilities, and because there's a apparent randomness in quantum physics, so we use probabilities. So how do you explain that, and could you link it with the Madhyamaka? And because it could seem that something has no cause, because it can be there or there can be different possibilities. So I think in the Madhyamaka they talk about like something has no cause. So maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. This is a very important question. By the way, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is very interested in this kind of question, you know, especially this question, because he doesn't like the idea that an event has no cause, even though of course, he knows of the Madhyamaka criticism of the concept of productive cause. But at least if you don't have a productive cause, at least you must have something like a codependent element that comes with the effect that you want to explain. So how do you explain the use of probability in quantum physics? And how do you explain the so-called indeterminacy of quantum physics? So this comes in two guises in quantum physics. The first guise is, as you said, that the symbol, the main symbol of quantum physics, which is, for instance, the wave function or the state vector, this main symbol has only one use, is to calculate the probability of finding a certain experimental result, nothing more. It's not the description of something, it's not the picture of a reality out there and so on. It's just an instrument to calculate probabilities. So, and in quantum physics, you cannot go beyond these probabilities. So it's really something very, one says, fundamental. You also have another element that gives you this feeling that quantum physics is indeterministic. The second element is Heisenberg's so-called indeterminacy or uncertainty relations, or uncertainty or indeterminacy principle. Okay, so here you have something very fundamental, a sort of pillar of quantum physics that tells you about indeterminacy. But here you hear two words. You have heard when I said Heisenberg's relations are either relations of indeterminacy or relations of uncertainty. And physicists have struggled about these two words. They said, is the problem of quantum physics a problem that says that nature itself is indeterminate? Or is it just our uncertainty about something that in fact, in reality, is determinate out there? Is it our uncertainty or the indeterminacy of nature? This was the debate, you know. And both, I must say, both cases, both answers give wrong consequences. So here again, it's very easy to understand the so-called indeterminacy of quantum physics and its use of probability at a strong level. It's very easy to understand that if you understand that there is no such thing as a description of nature by quantum physics, neither a description of nature that is indeterminate, nor a description of nature that is determinate, but that we do not know completely. Things do not go this way in quantum physics. In fact, what gives you the right explanation of the so-called indeterminacy in quantum physics and its use of probability is the fact that you cannot detach yourself from what you want to explore. The indeterminacy comes from the fact that you are completely involved in what you want to predict. And if you are yourself involved in what you want to predict, you cannot predict it because it depends on you. You know, it's very simple, very clear once again, if you accept to do this, you know, this step of mind. One way to see it, a very early way to understand it, was given by Heisenberg, and this way is very celebrated because Heisenberg in 1927 explained that, you know, when you want to probe the trajectory of a certain particle, for instance, an electron, you have to send a signal, a probe precisely. you must send a photon, a piece of light. But when you send a photon, the photon bounces on the electron that you want to explore. And by bouncing on the electron you want to explore, it disturbs it. So what you do in order to get knowledge changes what you want to know. And therefore, you cannot reach a complete knowledge that is independent of you. Now, of course, here again, if you accept this picture of Heisenberg, you still have confusions that come with it, because you imagine that, well, the electron has a life of its own. It follows a certain trajectory, but unfortunately, if you want to know it, then you disturb it. But things don't go this way. And it was Bohr who understood that. He said, no, it's not possible to dissociate the trajectory of the electron from the way you want to explore it. In fact, the two things are completely intermingled, and you can no longer separate it. And that's precisely this lack of separation between what is explored and the way to explore it that gives you the explanation of the so-called indeterminacy of quantum physics. There is even a beautiful theorem that proves it in the theory of quantum probability.
There's a question in the chat room. Michel, do you have any like a practical example that you could give to some of the things you were saying in terms of, let's say, how we go after a piece of knowledge changes our relationship to that knowledge that we want to explore?
Yeah, for instance, I gave the example of waves and particles. When do you say that there are waves? When do you say there are particles? When you say there are both? So it's very simple. Depends. It depends on the way you explore the elements you want to explore. If you want to explore a form of radiation, the so-called alpha radiation, electronic radiation, whatever, you use either a cloud chamber that shows you a beautiful approximate trajectory, and then you say, oh, this radiation is made of particles. Or you use an interferometer with two slits, and in that case, you see interferences that suggest strongly that what you are exploring is made of waves. So depending on the apparatus you use, you tend to say, oh, these are particles, or these are waves. But the problem is when you say, these are so and so. In fact, what you want to explore is not something in itself. It's just waiting for your intervention to decide about the aspect it will show you. So it shows you the aspect that you trigger in it. It is not something before you trigger it. It's just open. It's just, I would say, free to give you the answer, the kind of answer you want from it. It's very special and very interesting. And I will tell you later, maybe, that this is why quantum physics is also wonderfully applied to issues about human behavior.
Wonderful, thank you. Now we have again a different kind of a question. Tori, would you like to read your question, or would you like me to read it? It's in the chat room for those. You can all take a look. Let me see. Okay. Just jump in, Tori, if you would like to read it. Otherwise, as I said, I'm happy to read it for you. It says here, Michel, she said, "I'm happy to meet you. Could you please," and the question is, could you please say how the way that you live your life has changed through your understandings? The question may seem a bit strange, but it is felt that one needs to go beyond any set of religious beliefs and simply to be in the moment. Could you, Michel, please assist me letting go into this open state of being?
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think quantum physics is enough to change one's life. Not even the understanding of it is sufficient to change one's life. But what I felt in my personal life is a sort of synergy. Namely, what I want to understand fits quite well with what I wish to change in my life. And this is a wonderful feeling to see, you know, the connection between the two. It's not that you know, science doesn't decide of your life by no ways. But since our you know, our culture is so rich that it includes many things about self-understanding, about understanding of the events of the physical world, and so on, then, you know, the natural tendency we have, and I must say I had, was to try to connect all these things, to elaborate a unity out of it. And as I told you, it's exactly what happened to me in '96 when I simultaneously reached firm conclusions about the problems of interpretation of quantum physics on the one hand, and Buddhism on the other hand. I remember one of my friends who was what is called a realist interpreter of quantum physics, namely one who wants quantum physics to tell you a truth about the real nature of the world. One of these colleagues of mine and friends of mine asked me, but listen, when you accept that quantum physics has nothing to say about the real nature of the world, how do you live with that? I remember this question. It was very strong, you know, because he was also looking for something. He wanted to disclose the nature of the world, and this was very close, I think, to the standard religious belief in a foundation of the reality of the world. Belief in a creator who grounds everything. So this was his way. But suddenly, when he asked me that question, I realized that the answer had just occurred to me. And that this answer is that there is no foundation, no ground. And that opening oneself to what comes is precisely the way you can live with a theory that gives you no clue as to which foundation there is. So here is a connection between, here again, life and science, science and life, maybe mind and life.
Thank you. Others? Thomas, you're up again.
Yeah. I had a question because last week we had Father Tizo who talked about rainbow bodies and things like that. So it reminded me of what you said about with quantum physics, we want to like, some people use it to explain things that seems impossible. to us. And so my question is, does quantum physics allow those things to happen, like body dissolving into light and all these things? What's your thought on all that as a scientist?
Well, my position is very skeptical about that, and not about the facts, but about the possibility of explaining them by quantum physics. The facts I don't know. The facts are, I am open about the facts. And I'm also open, not as a physicist, but also as a phenomenologist. Because since I am also a phenomenologist, namely one who takes first-person experience very seriously, I take all these reports about first-person experience of what people have seen and experienced in such circumstances very seriously. But I'm not sure that we have necessarily to ask quantum physics to explain such things. To my knowledge, there is no such physical explanation. And when I've seen some attempts at giving explanation of such events by way of quantum physics, I've usually been struck by the poorness of these explanations, namely the lack of good grounds of such explanations. So let's separate the two things. To me, be open to exceptional events, occurring when great masters die and have so many exceptional events surrounding them. Let's be open about that. And on the other hand, be careful of not putting too much hope into quantum physics to explain that. Moreover, here again, I would like to warn many people about this temptation to ask physics to explain things that are essentially, here again, lived experiences. These are two different categories. Physics is a science about objective facts, not in the sense that they occur out there independently of us, but in the sense that we can point towards them collectively and agree about them collectively. Whereas these facts, namely rainbow body and so on, are usually things that are felt by some people who surround the person, some people who are caught into, a moment of strong and deep connection with one another and with the dying master. So to me, I prefer to separate the two things. It's more prudent.
Thanks.
Great. I understand that Eric Grinner has a question. Eric, is that right?
Yes. Good evening, Michel. I was wondering if there are so many connections and bridges between what we call in Tibetan Buddhism, the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, space, which basically define, in the Tibetan system, all beings and actually, all sentient beings on earth, and quantum physics. So really, are there any bridges, or can you make any similarities between the two?
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, well, these idea of the first 4 elements, namely fire, earth, air, and water, are the same elements as in so-called pre-Socratic Greek philosophy. Now, the 5th one, what is the 5th one you were alluding to?
Space.
Space, yes. Well, this is very interesting, by the way, but there was something that was used also by the ancient Greek, which was similar to space, which is just vacuum, the vacuum of the atomists, you know, the vacuum of the Democritus and Leucippus. It was not called an element, but it played a very important role, because without it, you could not have motion of atoms, because there would be no space to move. Now, of course, quantum physics has only one connection with this theory, is by way of atomism, precisely. The thread that goes from the elements to quantum physics is led by the idea of atomism, namely the idea that matter is made of discontinuous elements that are moreover indivisible. That is the meaning of atoms. Now, you know, this idea of atomism has taken almost more than 2,000 years to go from the initial idea of the Greeks to the modern concept of quantization, namely of discontinuity, a theory of discontinuous elements. And the same for Buddhism. Buddhism has had this theory of elements, of atoms, for so many thousands of years, and it has to wait a lot to evolve in the conception of these elements. One evolution that is very interesting has to do with a discussion about the nature of these elements. Do the elements are the elements objective or subjective, or neither, or something in between? Sometimes when you read some Buddhist texts, you have the feeling that the dissociation has not been made, because, for instance, some elements are made of qualities such as humidity or dryness, or you know, cold or heat or hot, and all these components, all these qualities are essentially felt qualities. They are subjectively felt qualities that you can feel with your senses and so on. So the disconnection between objective and subjective is not made. And I think in Greek atomism and in the Greek theory of elements, the dissociation was not made either. The dissociation between objective and subjective is a very, very modern feature of our knowledge. It probably came only in the 17th century, not before. But the very interesting thing is that, you know, after this period in which people believed that it's possible to separate between the subjective and the objective, between what reality is independently of us and we inside of us, after this period suddenly came quantum physics. And in quantum physics, you can no longer separate the two things. It becomes completely counterproductive to attempt to separate the two things. And so maybe quantum physics is the sign of something coming back from our past, namely something like the impossibility to separate ourselves from the world, or what Buddhists would call non-duality. You know, non-duality is a feature that has come back to science by way of a sort of hyperbolus, a sort of exaggeration of objectivity. If you want to exaggerate objectivity, as physics does, then you see that you cannot go all the way towards objectivity. You have to stop somewhere. you have to accept that you cannot be separated from the world. You have to accept the non-duality of knowledge. Well, I tried to answer your question, Eric.
Oh, thank you, Michel. And if I may, I have another one which is linked to non-duality and rebounding also on what Thomas was asking before is, you know, in Dzogchen, you know, the three quality of liberations are openness, luminosity, and compassion. And I was wondering, you know, how actually could, you know, quantum physics actually approach the three? Compassion in some ways, you know, being the inseparability and the fact that we're all interdependent, and therefore, you know, in many ways, everything cares for each other, even the elements. So yeah, I was wondering, you know, how one can actually understand the other.
Thank you, Eric. Well, quantum physics cannot transform openness, clarity, and compassion into an object of knowledge. That's very clear for me. So here again, you cannot have the standard physical account of an experience. But quantum physics can help us, nevertheless, indirectly, more indirectly, because it, for instance, when you try to understand the nature of the electron, you are caught into a sort of, you know, conundrum. You cannot tell what is the intrinsic nature of the electron, but you have to be open towards what will come from your experimental exploration of the electron. So openness is also a basic attitude of the scientist who is working with quantum physics. It's not quantum physics that gives you, I would say, openness as a feature of reality out there, because there is no reality out there, precisely. You understand? So, but the attitude of the scientist has to be open. What about, you know, compassion? Compassion, yeah, well, here again, I have difficulties thinking that quantum physics by itself will lead us to compassion. But here again, since it removes us from the so-called naturalist view that is so typical of the West, namely nature is on the one side and I am completely separate from nature. And it's just saying, you know, physics cannot do that. It cannot separate you from nature. I'm sorry. This is enough, I think, to trigger a new attitude. Or at least this is enough to prevent us from sticking to the old attitude. You see? So quantum physics cannot give you all the answers, but it prevents you from sticking to the old and bad answers, I would say. Here is my view about this.
Thank you, Michel.
Amy?
I'm a little bit like the auctioneer. So if you reach up to scratch your chin, I'm going to call you because you've bought it, so to speak. I was about to call on you, Leslie, and then I realized that might have been. Or do you have a question? Or no, you're just saying hello. Okay. I think you're on mute. At any rate, make yourself known if so I don't miss you. I want to make sure that everybody wants to say something has the chance. Leslie. Yeah.
Actually, I do have a question that I'll dare ask Michel. In one of your talks, we heard a lot about own being. Can you say a little bit more about what own being is? I can't even put it back in the context in which you used it. But
Yeah.
If I can understand better what own being is, that would be nice.
Yeah, own being is something that belongs to a being. Well, I have difficulties with English here because, English has the same word for the verb and the entity. If you say a being, for instance, my smartphone is a being, okay? Okay, this being has qualities. It is a rectangle, it has some golden reflections, and on the other side is essentially black. These are what is deemed to be the intrinsic properties of the phone. Okay, but if you think a little bit harder, you suddenly realize that it's not something that belongs intrinsically to the phone. It's not the own being of this being, so to speak. Being a rectangle is not a feature that belongs to the phone, but a way of seeing it. For instance, if I do this, you no longer see it as a rectangle. You see it as something trapezoidal. If I do this, you no longer see it golden, but something else, and so on. So it depends, and it depends on the light. It depends on the reflections. It depends on many things. It doesn't depend only on the phone. So all these properties are not something that belong to the own being of this being that is the phone. All these features are relative. They depend on a relation between, for instance, the light and the phone, or between the position and the phone, and so on and so on. Okay. So one would like to ascribe properties, namely things that are proper to something, namely something that belong to the own being of this thing. But usually it's not possible. And I believe, because I've done a lot of physics, that it's never possible, never. And all what you think belongs intrinsically to the thing, all the things that you would like to call the own being of the thing are in fact relative features. So here is an attempt.
So is it like there's no own being because there's nothing that describes it completely in its essence?
Exactly. It doesn't, there is nothing that describes it in its essence.
And that's true for everything.
It's true for everything. The only point that was raised by some philosophers, for instance, Leibniz and many others, is that there is maybe something that really points towards an own being. What is it? What we feel here and now. What we feel here and now.
So we're back to phenomenology.
Exactly. Because here you don't have a relation between anything.
Okay.
You have a self-appraisal of yourself at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
But here again, you may discuss that, because what is this self-appraisal? And you are, I know, Leslie, you are a psychoanalyst, so you may think that according to the moment and the situations and the history of the person who is in your on your couch, according to this moment of his or her life, then self-appraisal will be different.
Even if it's transient, right?
It makes it transient, exactly. So I don't know. I don't know if even that is absolute.
No, but I understand own being better now. So thank you.
Exactly. Thank you.
Elena?
Hello, Michel. Wonderful to see you. and hear you again. I will try to be as brief as possible, but I do apologize that this will take a bit of a scene setting. And it is related to Francis Tisser, Father Tisser's talk on rain body, and what Thomas has asked you, trying to sort of relate the physics. And I was thinking during the talk by Francis Tisser, and thinking about a kind of possible thought experiment. I want to get your answer to what that thought experiment might look like, or the outcome of that thought experiment. And what I was thinking is, you know, if one very generally takes the idea of rainbow body as being as a kind of the end result of one's work on one's awareness, of not fixating on anything as an objectively existing separate reality. Yeah. And to bring another element of a sort of Buddhist view, and particularly within kind of Dzogchen framework, this is elaborated a little bit more, that the reason we see things in a certain way is because of our collective karma, our collective repeated habitual patterns of seeing tree as a tree and rock as a rock. And then if we bring the neuroscience into this, you know, we're seeing things within the constraints of how the structure of our brain, and therefore the mind as a functional process, has evolved and stabilized itself. So if we've gone through the work of undoing all of this, right, not just as an individual that then comes to the point of being able to attain the rainbow body, but as a whole collective, you know, all of us reach that point. What would the world that we consider as a physical reality might look like to us? What will we perceive then?
Yeah. Interesting. Yes. Oh, it's a very.
Do you understand my sort of thought experiment?
Yes. Well, clearly, you know, one lesson I draw from quantum physics is that there is no equivalence between objectivity and intrinsic reality. Objectivity in quantum physics comes when all possible subjects conceived abstractly come to agree about a certain point, a result of an experiment, or a way of predicting it by a certain element of mathematics. So here is the concept of objectivity that really works in quantum physics. It's not objectivity as a property of the object itself, but it's objectivity as the possibility of agreeing on something. So it might be that in certain circumstances, or maybe at a certain point of our evolution, the kind of thing on which we will agree is completely different from what we tend to agree now. And for instance, we could think that one day we will agree about seeing, all of us, you know, the rainbow body of dying master.
Well, I was thinking about something different here, because if we think about the brain as an apparatus, you know, in a physical experiment, you have an apparatus collapsing the wave that then is, you know, the region is either as a particle or wave, right? So it's a kind of measuring the interconnection between the apparatus and how things get measured, i.e. perceived, in a sense. So the brain, we can say, also collapses, you know, the quantum soup in a certain way, and the habitual patterns of this collapse will, in a way, determine how we see things. So if everyone trained themselves to be completely open to perceiving things, to how they potentially can manifest, how could they even manifest?
Yeah, well,
In what way would they manifest?
you know, on this point of collapse of a wave function by an apparatus, I have mixed views.
Okay, well, maybe
The classical, well, not the classical, but the usual way of saying things, namely that there is a wave function that describes reality, and then someone, you know, with an apparatus, a brain, and even a consciousness comes and suddenly changes something in this reality. But I think this is a very dualist way of putting things, because the wave function itself doesn't depict reality independently of us. It, for instance, according to Cubism, the wave function just describes the way we would bet about a future event that will occur in front of us, somewhere in a laboratory, or maybe in a Tibetan monastery. So what we change by observing is not something of the world, of the objective external world. It is our own way, our own tendency to believe or to bet. So in that way, you know, if you cut the non-duality from the root, from the beginning, then the way you understand these things changes a lot. So
in a way that's what I'm trying to go with that thought experiment. So if we have cut that root,
yeah,
what would the world appear like?
that's good. Yeah. Then,
yeah. Thank you, Michel. Thank you.
We should try indeed.
Yes. Thank you.
Marion, did you have a question? Please go ahead, Marion. You're on mute. Yeah.
Yes. Hello, Michel.
Salut, Marion.
So this back to the shift of perception. Yeah, can you hear me?
Can you speak loudly?
Closer to the microphone.
Closer to the microphone.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Back to the shift of perception. It's not something that we can provoke, isn't it? And the intention to actually move forward or even actualize it can be a major obstacle. So how do you solve this problem? It can be a major obstacle to the actualization of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's, you know, this idea that you will, so to speak, fit an event that is so important in the life of the people who live in a monastery and who are connected with the master. You will bring this event in the setting of a laboratory is, to me, also an illusion. It's something different. It's something that has to do with the relation between the people who are connected with this master and the master. It's not a piece of objectified, you know, phenomenon. So I think it's important to understand that indeed the type of relation that you have with this master is also crucial.
Now, I was talking about the shift of perception itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
The shift of perception, to me, is also connected with a certain situation and a certain way of putting your mind.
Okay.
So sometimes I've experienced things like that when I was, for instance, in the monastery in Sikkim. But I don't think it was something that I have to isolate from the context and say, oh, this is a phenomenon that is completely object that can be objectified, and so on and so on. So it can be an obstacle for this kind of event to happen if you try to put that in the typical settings of a modern scientific laboratory. This is also a point because I know that many of our most remarkable scientists try to do that. They try to put the situation into a laboratory settings. Some elements of it can be done, certainly, but some aspects of the experience cannot be treated this way, I think. But probably research itself, the attempts to do that will teach us what we can do and what we cannot do in this domain. I'm sure you have witnessed some wonderful things about that, Marion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Michel.
Thank you, Marion.
Wolfgang raised a hand.
Wolfgang, thank you. Thank you, Wolfgang. Go ahead.
Thank you. I also want to ask something, I think, in the spirit of the previous questions. That it seems to me that the lectures that you recorded, Michel, and what you're sharing with us today is much more about unlearning than it is about learning. And so for me, it seems the main insight is in the negative statements or the negations about misconceptions about how quantum mechanics is often popularly or even in among physicists understood or misunderstood, but also very specifically that it doesn't tell us what the world is or what something is, like the electron is a particle or the electron is a wave, or even under these circumstances, it is the one or the other. But if it says anything about these matters besides just, giving us probabilities to work on and calculate, it would say something about what things are not. And I noticed there's a little bit of an appeal to that, but also a resistance, because the natural tendency is to try to figure out what things are. Hence, I was trying to learn more about getting a grip on things. But here I feel that you're in a way inviting us to open our minds to undo these habitual tendencies of the mind, to try to grasp two views in a way. And go more and more to an appreciation of, what things are not, right? And somehow the parallels with Buddhist philosophy, speculations about what nature is, the universe, is it eternal or not? What was it in the past or not? That the Buddha also was silent or said, it's don't worry about these questions because it will only drive you to madness. So it's not really a question I'm asking, but maybe can you say more about it to help, deepen this maybe?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. It's exactly that. I think the teaching of quantum physics is negative. And it was said even by one of our best French philosophers, Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He said, physics has in store a negative lesson for us, a negative philosophical lesson for us. Now, it can be disappointing to some, but those who know a little bit about, say, negative theology will not be disappointed. Because when you negate all the narrow features of something, then you open up a world of possibilities. And it is this world of possibilities that has been opened up by physics. Physics that doesn't say what is the world, but it say, oh, it's not so simple and narrow-minded as you believed before. So it's there is some wonder in it, okay? But wonder that you cannot fill in. Openness and wonder.
But why do you think so many physicists and phenomenologists fall into a bit of a nihilism rather than staying in this openness with this sort of the and the element of compassion that the Buddhist teachings communicate? Because I remember we had a conversation with you about the phenomenologists in particular at some point, in the tendency for this kind of sense of existential fear almost as an outcome of phenomenological reduction and epoche. Could you comment on that?
You're right, Elena. There is an example, and we discussed this example when we were talking. The celebrated example is Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, who wrote a book called Nausea in English, La Nausée in French. So Nausea is the story of a historian who is studying something in the library, and suddenly all his wishes, views of the future, and even imagination about the past suddenly collapse, and he sees only what is given here, the present, just that. He has no more determination of what is occurring here and now, but he's just present to what is given to him. And for the character of this novel, namely the character is called Roquentin, the feeling is that of a nausea. It's horrible. Oh, this presence, this being, this thickness of what there is. It's terrible. Okay, so why? And I don't know if I can answer the question why, but what I can try to answer is how to go beyond that and suddenly see that this present that is so oppressive for the historian opens up an extraordinary number of possibilities he could not even have figured out if he had stuck to his usual view of future and past. Because his views of future and past were highly determined by his culture, his past psychological history, and so on and so on. Whereas when he suddenly drops all these things, then the whole world opens up in front of him, or not in front of him, in fact, in him just as much as in front of him. So he can reinvent the future, he can reinvent the past. And this is exactly what another remarkable author, a specialist of hypnosis, François Roustan, said. When you completely drop all these preconceptions, then everything becomes possible. And instead of being fixed on these projections, you become open to virtualities. And I think this is what should have happened to Roquentin at the end of the novel, but Jean-Paul Sartre didn't do that.
Thomas?
So you talked about phenomenology, but I don't know much about it. So could you explain it, and how does it relate to you as a scientist? How is it different and all this?
Yeah. Phenomenology, well, Maurice Merleau-Ponty said once that phenomenology was born as a reaction to the narrowing of the mind that is triggered by the scientific attitude. So science and phenomenology has something in common. They come together, so to speak. Because when you focus your attention only on objective events, then you forget what you are feeling now, what you project. You are no longer, you pay no longer any attention to your own present experience. Instead, phenomenology says, okay, let's pay more attention to our present experience. And what is very important, if we do that, then we start to understand the real root of science. The root of science is not something out there. It's our discipline of how we organize our perception, our conceptualization, our unity of mind, and so on and so on. When you understand yourself, then you understand better science. So phenomenology is historically a philosophical discipline that has been created by Edmund Husserl. But Edmund Husserl was a mathematician. And what he wanted to understand was the origin of mathematics. And he understood the origin of mathematics by saying the origin of mathematics is in the mathematician. Okay. So I think, well, I could say much more, but you see the connection between the two, between science and phenomenology. I think they are as the two faces of the same coin, the objective face and the lived face. And the lived face cannot be separated from the objective face, because objectivity comes as a focus for many experiences of living beings. So here is the nexus between science and phenomenology.
Thanks.
Michel, we have a couple of minutes left. I thought it would be good if you would be willing and have it ready, so to speak, in your head to give us a preview, just as I asked you to give a summary of the series past. If you just give us a preview of what's to come.
Yes, there are. Well, with Cornelius, we have arranged a sort of series of topics that would be treated in the line of philosophy. And so I think I have plenty of topics, but one topic will be precisely phenomenology. What is phenomenology? What is this discipline of careful study of one's own first-person experience? And how can it give some hints, some clues about how science is elaborated by human beings endowed with lived experience? So this is one series I would like to develop. Another series has to do about consciousness. What is consciousness? How does it relate with the brain? Can you say that it is produced by the brain? Or can you say that the brain is an object of consciousness? Or can you connect the two things together? Another series I would like to do is about a general overview of the connections between Buddhism and science. And so on. I think I'm forgetting some of the proposals I gave Cornelius and Eric, but there are others, depending on the interest, depending on whether it goes on. And at any rate, I thank all this wonderful audience of so much attention and nice questions.
Thank you, Michel. I think we can come to a close now. It's really a fantastic gift, I think, that you are giving to us. You know, it's a rich meal, let me put it that way, and diverse, and you know, that you're offering to the Mind and Life Europe Friends program and members of the association. And really glad that we could do it. And I might just take this opportunity to thank at this point Eric Rinner as well, with whom we've collaborated on this, and who was very keen on having this done. So this is, I think, a good opportunity for me to thank you, Eric, for pushing this ball down the road, and thank all of you for participating and being part of this. And we've heard that little preview of some really great things to look forward to, and we will, of course, share with you with our newsletter and other, you know, social media, what will be available when. So stay tuned, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here because we're going to do webinars after each series, so it gives you a chance to ask questions on each one that we've done. So that's the idea. And we'll also ask for your feedback on the whole process, because we want to, you know, we consider ourselves a learning organization, and we want to make it as appealing and attractive and interesting and useful for you as possible. So we're going to be grateful for your input when we contact you in that regard. So again, thanks for participating. And Michel, thank you. And I wish you all a good day or a good evening. Until next time.
And thank you, Cornelius, for hosting us.
Indeed, indeed. I'm just getting a note. Hold on before you sign off. The CCE webcast. Well, we have a number of webcasts. Not only do we have Michel kind of leading us off here, but we have a couple of things coming up. We're also planning our education webcast. We're layering webcast one upon the other based on our Beyond Confines science symposium that we held near Munich last year. So over time, and what time we're not sure, we want to have at least 6 tracks or 6 subject areas, each with at least 3 series. And our next one will be on education. It's curated by Catherine Weir. We're going to launch that. We're completed filming now for the first series. We're going to launch that hopefully at the end of this month. We're actually planning to launch it in about a week and a half, something like that. So that will also be an opportunity to learn something there. So, you know, we really have I think, a really great menu of items coming down the pike for you. And this one is, you know, we're teeing this one up for the Community for Contemplative Education, or the CCE. So stay tuned for that. As I said, in our next newsletter, we'll be giving you the date when we're going to launch that. Hopefully next week. That's the plan at any rate. So thank you all again. And I think that was the final little plug, a little pitch. Thanks for your patience. Okay. So all the best. Take care and good day. Bye-bye.